So tonight, as far as a talk, what I was going to offer is maybe just to encourage you all to consider how your Dharma practice has resulted in a greater sense of patience or an ability to be patient. I was offering some instruction earlier today, and one of the things that I was saying to people was kind of hinting towards this cultivation of patience in your practice. So, can you find that there has been a development of patience as a result of your meditation practice? Sometimes, we encourage this kind of new perspective related to your meditation practice, where we're describing it as a practice of non-doing, that you're not out to do anything, that the practice is a practice of awareness. You're just practicing being aware of what experience is arising in any given moment, meeting it with mindfulness. And that's really challenging for some people because, especially when you're new to practice, you feel like, well, I have to be doing something. I have to quiet my mind. I have to find release from this stress. I have to overcome this sadness. And really, the practice of mindfulness is to have this non-judgmental, non-preferential willingness to engage with whatever's present. And it is a practice. So you will find that if there is some discomfort in the body, there's an opportunity to meet it with mindfulness. And the real richness in having the courage to meet discomfort in the body or some sort of thought or an emotion that is presenting an unpleasant feeling tone is that there is insight to be gained, insight into the nature of that experience. And just as true, if there is something that is pleasant, something wonderful that you're experiencing in your life, the encouragement is to meet it with mindfulness, that there is an opportunity for insight in doing so, in meeting that experience without preference. So this preference with this it's really pointing to not moving into a relationship of craving with the experience. And every time you meditate, you have this wonderful opportunity. And so there is this kind of encouragement to see your practice as a practice of non-doing. I'm not out to manage, control an experience. I'm not out to gain or become anything in particular through my meditation practice. It's just to sit and observe whatever's naturally taking place so that I can afford myself that opportunity to begin to gain insight. So we're being mindful so that we can remember to see clearly how things are. And when we see clearly, that moves us into that liberating understanding. And that is what we know to be this wonderful benefit of our meditation practice. When we're mindful, we see clearly, and it results in an understanding that frees the mind. You don't have to make anything happen. You just have to be witness to what is happening without delusion. And that's the role that mindfulness plays. So you don't have to, if there's some sort of suffering in your life, some sort of disquiet, you don't have to go to war with that. You just have to see the truth. And sometimes that takes a lot of courage, and sometimes that takes a lot of fortitude. But again, what is helpful is to see it as like, oh, this is a practice of non-doing. I'm not out to do anything. I'm just going to give myself this chance to see the truth. And in seeing the truth, the mind is liberated. Now, like I said before, sometimes this idea of non-doing is really challenging for people. We're all very much conditioned to think that the best way to get where we want to go is to make it happen. And so the instructions for mindfulness is sometimes they come across very counterintuitive. So going back to this idea of patience, for those people who really have a challenge moving into this non-doing instruction of practice, sometimes I'll tell them, well, what you're doing is you're practicing patience. So when you sit on your meditation cushion and you close your eyes and you become still, you're practicing patience, being patient with the body and all of its pain, being patient with the mind and all of its fabrication, and returning again and again to the present moment. So even if you don't recognize it, every time you meditate, you are cultivating greater and greater patience. What's really wonderful is when you do recognize that that's what you're practicing, it furthers the development of that patience. And patience is a virtue. It's one of these qualities that we can probably readily recognize is in it's lacking in the world. It might be lacking in our relationships, we're lacking in our lives, in our work area where we work, how we meet with others, in friendship. And the more you begin to direct this mindful attention, this mindful awareness to seeing the deficit of patience in yourself or the furthering of this quality of patience, it strengthens the resolve and the motivation to further cultivate it. And this is all very humbling. And this is one of these other qualities of Dharma practice that's really, sometimes really wonderful to recognize. And sometimes we don't see it developing until after it's maybe been pointed out to us. Oh, you're so humble. Ah, oh, you're so patient. How do you do it? And you're kind of surprised by someone recognizing these qualities at times. It's like, oh, I never thought of myself as humble or patient. And again, in my view, these are qualities that they're worthy of cultivation. They're worthy of recognition. And it does seem at times in our lives that there is a deficit of humility and patience. And so when you consider that these qualities may in fact be very rare and very virtuous, wholesome, worthy of cultivation, worthy of embodiment, to be an exemplar of patience, to be an exemplar of humility, does the mind brighten? Does the mind incline towards, yeah, I want to cultivate those qualities? Something I thought I would share. As we practice the Dharma, when we develop and pursue things like what I'm talking about, what is it that we're developing and pursuing? We're developing that which leads to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, the stillness of the mind, to directing, to a direct knowledge of an experience, or what we would call self-awakening. Or another way of describing this is unbinding. The qualities that we're cultivating lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to a stilling, a cooling of the mind, to an unbinding. And I think when we can recall those times where we have experienced patience as a virtue within ourselves, we've experienced the benefits of having been patient, we see that, yeah, there is this unbinding, this release, this cooling of the mind. We can see very clearly how if we had lost our patience, the direction it would have taken our life in a moment, losing our patience. And so it's a really wonderful thing to reflect upon those times where I maintained my cool. The coolness of this mind, the disenchantment to take the bait that would lead me out of this place of patience. Or I was mindful enough to recognize conceit. I saw it in the mind, and yet I didn't take the bait to lead me off into that spinning out fabrication of the mind where I'm so focused on myself. But I remained in that position of being of service to others. And there was a real sense of humility. Sometimes when we're mindful enough, we can kind of see and catch ourselves when we're really getting carried away and we don't have that quality of humility. And we see the danger, we recognize it, and immediately we start to temper what we're saying. We begin to slow down. But a lot of this takes a great skill of being mindfully aware of ourselves, mindful in our speech, mindful in our actions. So what I'm offering tonight is just this encouragement to reflect upon these qualities and to keep in mind that what we're practicing as we practice the Dharma is this disenchantment. So thinking of like, okay, what causes suffering? Greed, hatred, and delusion, this quality of craving leads us straight into suffering. So how do I free the mind of suffering? There's the disenchantment with the idea that getting what we want leads to happiness, and somehow not getting what we want will ensure that we remain happy forever. It's abandoning greed, abandoning aversion, coming to this place where the mind can see clearly. It's this understanding that recognizes everything changes. Everything is dukkha. Everything is ultimately unsatisfying. What provides a sense of happiness in one moment is just the moment. It's not a lasting satisfaction. And everything is changing. Everything is ungovernable. It's not within my control to ensure that I never experience setbacks and disappointments. So when I abandon craving, that is a disenchantment. Disenchanting the mind from that enchanted mind that thinks that I can ensure that I will always be happy, that I will never experience unhappiness. The tendency, the habit of the mind to cling, to move into that position of greed, or to be in that position of ill will or aversion. When we abandon craving, that's the dispassion. That's the disenchantment. It's like we're caught in a spell and we've been disenchanted. We see clearly that greed and aversion, they're insubstantial, they're changing just like everything else. And that's where we begin to experience cessation. That's where we begin to experience stilling, the stilling of the mind, the cooling of the mind, the awakening, the unbinding of the mind. It happens through clear seeing, through the practice of mindfulness. That happening is, that awakening, that whole process is the liberating results of seeing clearly. The Buddha discovered that gaining release from samsara requires assigning to each of the noble truths a special task. And so this is the Four Noble Truths, and the special task that is assigned to each noble truth is this. The first noble truth is to be comprehended, to understand dukkha. to understand the noble truth of dukkha, that things are ultimately unsatisfying, ultimately ungovernable. The second noble truth is to be abandoned. So the craving, the second noble truth, greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind, this quality of craving that leads us into suffering, is to be abandoned. The third is to be realized. To realize the letting go, the cessation, the release that happens when we abandon craving, the release from suffering that happens when we abandon craving. And the fourth is to be developed, the fourth being the Eightfold Path, the development of the Eightfold Path, the path that leads to the release of dukkha. The full realization of the third noble truth paves the way for awakening, the end of ignorance, craving, and suffering, and karma itself, the direct penetration to the transcendent freedom of the supreme happiness that stands as the final goal of all Buddhist teachings, the unconditioned, the deathless, unbinding, or what we all know to be nirvana or nibbana. Nibbana is best described as this cooling of the mind. So again, it's really important that when you think about, okay, here I am, I'm going to meditate. Why are you meditating? What is it all about? And can you evaluate in yourself that what you're practicing, the instruction that you're practicing, the way you're going about cultivating either humility or virtue, is it this whole process that follows the Four Noble Truths? Are the Four Noble Truths there, present, as you are cultivating wholesome states of mind and abandoning unwholesome states of mind? Because we can so easily fool ourselves, and we're just practicing greed for this and aversion to that. The wisdom that we're cultivating in our practice, don't get lost in just chasing what feels good. You want to ask the question, is it wise? Is it skillful? Sometimes things that don't feel so good are skillful. Sometimes things that feel great are unskillful. So we need a real discerning wisdom. We need wisdom to help us recognize the path. There's this whole term of spiritual materialism, and it's basically what I've just described. It's where you kind of get confused and you think the path is all about feeling good. And for those of you who have sat any time on a cushion meditating, you know that it doesn't always feel so good. And I'm not just talking about aches and pains in the body. I'm talking about coming to the truth. A realization of the truth. Sometimes there's a lot of growing pains there. Sometimes it can hit very hard, but it's always freeing. It's always that result of unbinding. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm hoping that this is of benefit to you and your practice. I will touch again upon the fact that, I'm going to be coming to Omaha the first week in November. I will be giving that first Tuesday talk in person. And then on the second and third, there is a workshop that I'm offering on the practice of Maranasati, which is death awareness, death meditation. And this is really to offer the instruction for how to practice death meditation. It's not a morbid pursuit. It actually results in great joy to come to the reality of this truth that we all will eventually meet our end. We are mortal, and yet we totally space this off. We forget about it all the time. We totally don't consider the fact that we're aging in every moment, that old age and disease is imminent for all of us, and eventually death is where we're all headed. So when we come to the truth of that reality, it supports a joyous quality in the mind. It's not a oh no. It's more like, wow, every moment of your life becomes rich and precious because you see the truth that it's impermanent. It's something that is unique in each moment. So I think what I would say about the workshop is that it's not meant to be, the workshop itself is not meant to be this cathartic experience for you, although it could possibly be just that. The workshop is meant to give you the instructions so that you can practice cultivating an awareness of your own mortality, so that your mind, you're not deluded. You're not deluded in thinking that this body is somehow reliable and unchanging. Because when we cling to this body, there's a tremendous amount of suffering there. This body will change. The faculties of this body will change. And so when we come to that truth, it's worthwhile practice for sure. So the aim of this workshop is to give you the tools, give you the instructions to formally practice Maranasati in all of its forms, to cultivate that awareness in the mind. And this is one of those profound teachings of the Buddha, where the mindfulness instructions of the Satipatthana Sutta lead to liberation. You all know the benefit of practicing loving kindness and how that can lead to freedom in the mind. There is a great freedom in the mind that is cultivated, realized through practicing an awareness of death. Completely liberating. Well, any questions or comments about what I share tonight? Do you feel like you have some instruction to go home and cultivate virtues of patience and humility?
I have a question, Jonathan.
Yes.
You spoke a lot about patience. Sometimes when I hear patience, I associate it with laziness. Can you distinguish between what's being lazy and what's being patient?
Mm. I think of patience more for me as discipline. So when I practice patience, it looks a lot like discipline. And I'm trying to think of some example. Think of some delicious food that's placed in front of you, and yet you're waiting for everyone else to take their seat, and you're being patient. And you know, in a way, that's a lot of discipline to not just dive into your food. I used to have this dog, and you know, man, you'd pour his food, and he would bolt for it, and it would be gone before the other dogs even had their bowls filled. And it was like, did you even taste it? Did you? You know, it's like that's magic. You made it disappear so quick. So I think that's kind of something that I notice, and so this idea of, well, I think there's an honesty within ourselves that will recognize if we're truly being patient or if we're just being lazy. So I think deep down, if we kind of turn that awareness back on ourselves, if we're reflecting on ourselves, we'll wake up and see, like, I'm just being lazy here, as opposed to being patient. Patient with this body, patient with the mind, patient with others. I really honestly, I think there takes a great effort in being patient sometimes. The more we practice it, I think the more the mind naturally inclines to being patient. But I think if it's something we're practicing, it takes some effort. It takes some energy to be patient. And that doesn't look like laziness to me. So I think if you begin to take the skills that you've cultivated thus far in your meditation practice to begin to investigate what is laziness, what is patience, you'll begin to find your own distinction. You'll begin to recognize for yourself, okay, this is what laziness feels like. I'm mindful of it. I'm here for it. I'm not recalling a time when I was lazy. I'm actually present in this moment of laziness. And then do the same, being present in that moment of patience and recognize, wow, this is a lot of work. Or, hey, this comes easy to me. But I think the whole thing is that with that encouragement to really be present in those moments when these qualities of mind are present so that you don't miss them, that's the real teacher. So these qualities are really great. Laziness and patience, they're teaching you directly what they are. You can be mindful of them and they will teach you, here's what I am. Sometimes cultivating certain qualities, it's a little challenging because like, for example, humility. How can I know what it is to be humble? How does being humble, does that teach me directly the same way being patient will teach me how to be patient? What I've found is when I notice, when I am mindfully aware of my lack of humility, that's what teaches me humility. When I see the absence of my humility, that teaches me what it means to be humble.
No, thank you. That helps a lot, especially the words effort and discipline. That was helpful. So thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Very good. Anyone else? I rarely take questions. Even when I'm there in person, I don't take questions very often.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Jonathan. Actually about the workshop that you're teaching.
Yes.
Yes, I'm kind of a little uncomfortable asking this. No, we've heard about the workshop last week, and it kind of was a question that came up for me I'm very interested in participating, but I have uh, a really kind of sharp, I guess I would describe it, fear of death and a lot of kind of anxiety. I've had panic attacks pretty regularly throughout my life, just kind of contemplating that. And so I have a kind of a back and forth, I think, with Anne about wondering whether or not that workshop would be something that could be beneficial anyway and that I should do, or if that I should, whether or not I should maybe wait on doing something like that out of concern of maybe having like a minor panic attack in the middle of your.
Well, I kind of feel like I know your practice enough to where I think that you probably have cultivated enough mindfulness to where you could manage that. And if you can't, then we'll take care of you. And you can always step away. If you feel like it's becoming overwhelming or too much, you can step away. But I think one of the things that you said that is interesting to me is that there's a real sharp quality to recognizing, oh wow, this truth of death. I think if we all don't have that, we're deluding ourselves. You know, you may not have it right now. Maybe you've got this idea of some peace around death, but when your mortality is right there, when it's right ready, your last moment is within a breath. That's the greatest unknown, and there can be a lot of fear that arises in the mind in that if you have not considered your mortality. And so it's really just, let's move gently into relationship with this awareness so that we can truly be as prepared as we can be, and also recognizing that we can't fully be prepared because we are coming to something that is the great unknown for all of us. I've heard wonderful stories of Dharma teachers coming to the end of their life. And one of the remarkable things is how they are more concerned of calming those around them. They're not focused on themselves. They're focused on everyone else, saying, hey, everybody, it's fine. I'm just dying. Don't stress. It's okay. This is part of life. And so there's this, really wonderful quality of like ease and understanding of like, oh, this is part of the human journey, and it is okay. And we can take care with cultivating that awareness and gradually cultivating that awareness. It's not some harsh pill you have to just adopt and swallow, with one workshop. But keep in mind that what you're going to be practicing is coming to that truth. Really recognizing that, okay, this body is changing from moment to moment. This body is going to die. In a lot of our instructions in meditation practice, we look at the 4 elements of the body. The earth element of the body, the wind element of the body, the fire element of the body, the water element of the body. That earth element will scatter. That water element will dry up. That fire elemental will become cool. And the wind element will become still. When you really tap into this body and you're aware of the elements and you recognize that this is something that will happen, it's not this terrifying thing. It's like we can look at everything around us and it's all teaching us the Dharma. It's teaching us non-clinging. And so this death awareness helps us cultivate the non-clinging relationship with this body. So I would continue to evaluate for yourself if you feel like this workshop will be of benefit to you. But keep in mind, the instruction is going to be offered as compassionately as possible, but it's also going to be offered with the truth of the Dharma, which is realism. It's not going to be nihilistic. It's not going to be optimistic. It's going to be very real. And it's a reality that we all must meet. And there can be a real maturing in a willingness to meet that reality. This is part of maturing into our humanness. So I would encourage you to continue to evaluate for yourself if you would like to attend. Keep in mind, if you do attend and it does feel like it's too intense for you, it's totally cool to take off, pass, to wish everybody well, and say that I think that it's going to be definitely something that I'm going to continue to offer. Part of my own Dharma training is focused on offering this death awareness practice, and so I'm going to be offering this workshop again. I'm going to be offering this workshop, and the workshop is going to grow in its content. So there will be more and more of this workshop development as time goes on. So this is kind of an introduction into what I'm personally developing as a teaching. And eventually, it will be longer than 2 days. It may be many weeks of practice. So, keep in mind that, if this time around seems like it's too sharp, that's totally okay and no worries. And again, remember what I said. I think for all of us, it can be sharp. And, sometimes we can really delude ourselves thinking, I've been practicing, I got this, I know about death. And, it's one of those things that we have to make an effort to get to know, because everything in our society shields us from it. May the merit of this practice be a cause and a condition for your own liberation and the liberation of all beings everywhere. Wishing you all well. May you know the blessing of the triple gem, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Have a wonderful evening.